The night the Alpha King first heard the child's crying, he should have walked away. Kings did not concern themselves with orphaned pups, especially not blind ones left to shiver in the servants' quarters of the royal palace. But something in that sound, raw, broken, utterly alone, pierced through centuries of carefully constructed walls. He found himself outside her door, ancient magic thrumming beneath his skin, and for reasons he couldn't name, he began to hum. It was a melody he'd forgotten he knew, one that tasted of moonlight and loss. The crying stopped. The silence that followed felt like a question he'd been avoiding for 20 years. Inside that room, a little girl pressed her unseeing eyes against the door, listening to the voice of the monster everyone feared, and felt safe for the first time in her short, dark life. Neither of them knew that the lullaby binding them together was the same one her mother had sung the night she'd vanished, the night she'd been stolen from him. Some threads, once woven by fate, can never truly be severed. They only wait, patient and inevitable, to be pulled taut again. The Blood Moon Palace existed in perpetual twilight, suspended between the mortal realm and the veil, that shimmering barrier separating the human world from the ancient territories of the supernatural. Here in the heart of the Lycan Kingdom, shadows moved with intention, and the very stones remembered every drop of blood spilled in the name of power. Ilara had never seen any of it. She navigated the servants' corridors by memory and touch, her small fingers trailing along walls that hummed with residual magic. 8 years old, and she'd learned to make herself invisible, a survival skill for a blind orphan in a palace where weakness was currency for cruelty. "Watch it, little ghost," someone hissed as she nearly collided with a passing servant. The woman's voice carried the distinctive rasp of a wolf who'd shifted too many times, wearing down her human vocal cords. "The king's in a mood. Stay out of sight." Ilara pressed herself against the cold stone, nodding mutely. She'd learned not to speak unless absolutely necessary. Her voice, the other servant said, was too soft, too human. In a palace full of predators, she was prey that had somehow slipped through the cracks. The Lycan Kingdom operated on a hierarchy as old as the moon itself. At the apex stood the Alpha King, Theron Ashenblade, the immortal wolf, the breaker of chains, the last of the ancient bloodline. Beneath him, the noble houses, families whose lineage traced back to the first wolves, those who'd drunk from the moon goddess's own spring and been transformed into something more than human, less than divine. Then came the common wolves, the palace guard, the servants who'd been born with the gift of the shift, and finally, at the very bottom, the humans, those kept for menial labor, for feeding, for amusement. Ilara occupied a space even lower than that. She was human, blind, orphaned, and worst of all, she'd been found on the palace steps with no explanation, no family, no pack to claim her. The head housekeeper, a severe woman named Maris with silver streaking her dark hair, had taken her in with the enthusiasm one might show a stray dog, useful for simple tasks, not worth the cost of feeding. "You'll earn your keep," Maris had told her on that first day, her voice sharp as broken glass, "or you'll be sent beyond the veil where the Forsaken hunt. Do you understand?" Ilara had understood. The Forsaken were wolves who'd lost themselves to the beast, who'd shifted and never shifted back, who roamed the wild places between worlds, mad with hunger and rage. Even the thought of them made her small heart race. So she'd learned to scrub floors by feel, to fold linens into perfect squares, to move through the palace like a whisper. She'd learned the schedule of the place, when the king held court in the Obsidian Hall, when the noble families gathered for their political machinations, when the corridors would be empty enough for a blind child to navigate safely. She'd learned, too, to recognize voices, the cruel laugh of Lord Cassius, who enjoyed tripping servants for sport, the honeyed tones of Lady Seraphine, whose kindness was always a prelude to manipulation, the cold, measured words of Commander Darius, the king's right hand, whose loyalty was absolute and whose mercy was non-existent, and she'd learned the king's presence, not by sight, obviously, but by the way the very air changed when he was near, a pressure, ancient and overwhelming, that made her wolf-born colleagues drop their eyes and bare their throats in instinctive submission. She'd never been close enough to hear his voice clearly, only the distant rumble of it during court sessions, filtering through stone and distance. The king, everyone said, was a monster, beautiful as the moon, and twice as cold. He'd ruled for over 3 centuries, had crushed rebellions and conquered territories, had taken no mate and produced no heir. His heart, if he'd ever possessed one, had turned to ice long ago. Ilara believed them. Monsters were easier to understand than the alternative. Today she'd been assigned to the East Wing, the oldest part of the palace, where the stones still bore scorch marks from some ancient battle and the air tasted of old magic. Her task was simple: dust the artifacts in the Gallery of Remembrance, a long hall filled with relics from the kingdom's history. She worked slowly, methodically, her fingers learning the shape of each object before she cleaned it. A sword, its blade still sharp after centuries. A crown too heavy for her small hands that seemed to pulse with residual power. A mirror, its surface strangely warm, that reflected nothing. She knew this because the other servants had whispered about it, frightened and fascinated. "They say the king looks into it sometimes," one had murmured, searching for something he lost. Ilara didn't understand what a king who had everything could possibly have lost, but she dusted the mirror carefully anyway, her reflection invisible to her as it was to the glass itself. She was reaching for the next artifact when she heard it. Footsteps, heavy and measured, approaching from the main corridor. Not the quick patter of servants or the casual stride of nobles. These steps carried weight, authority, inevitability. The pressure hit her like a physical force. Her knees buckled, and she caught herself against the display table, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to make herself even smaller than she already was. The Alpha King was coming. Ilara's hands shook as she tried to gather her cleaning supplies to flee before he arrived, but her fingers fumbled and the cloth slipped from her grasp. She heard it hit the floor with a soft sound that might as well have been a thunderclap in the sudden, terrible silence. The footsteps stopped. "Who's there?" The voice was deep, resonant, carrying harmonics that spoke of the wolf beneath the man. It wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. It simply was. Absolute. Undeniable. The voice of someone who'd never needed to raise it to be obeyed. Ilara's throat closed. She couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stand there, trembling, her sightless eyes fixed on nothing. I asked a question. Closer now. She could smell him. Pine and smoke, and something wilder. Something that called to a part of her she didn't understand. Answer or face the consequences of disrespect. "Ilara," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I'm cleaning. I'll go. I'm sorry." Silence. Long enough that she wondered if he'd already left, if she'd imagined the whole encounter. Then, "You're the blind child." Not a question. A statement. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Look at me." The cruelty of the command, intentional or not, made something crack inside her chest. "I can't," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I can't see." Another pause. Then, unexpectedly, "How old are you?" 8, Your Majesty." "And they have you working in the gallery, alone?" Something shifted in his tone, not quite anger, but close. "Who assigned you this task?" "Head housekeeper Maris, Your Majesty." She heard him move, sensed him closer now, and fought the urge to bolt. Running from an alpha was instinct triggering. It would only make things worse. "You're afraid." Still that neutral tone, but underneath it, something else. Curiosity, perhaps. "Of me." "Everyone's afraid of you, Your Majesty," Ilara said, then immediately wished she could take the words back. Speaking truth to power was dangerous. But instead of anger, she heard something that might have been a laugh, brief, humorless. "Yes, I suppose they are." A pause. "What's your family name, child?" "I don't have one, Your Majesty. I was found on the palace steps when I was a baby. No one knows where I came from." The silence that followed felt different, heavier, charged with something she couldn't name. "Found," he repeated softly. "On the palace steps." "When?" 8 years ago, Your Majesty. During the Blood Moon Festival." She couldn't see the way his expression changed, couldn't see how his hands clenched at his sides, or how his eyes, one silver, one gold, the mark of his ancient bloodline, suddenly blazed with an emotion he'd thought long dead. The Blood Moon Festival. 8 years ago. The same night his mate had vanished without a trace, leaving only questions and a grief so profound it had nearly destroyed him. The same night he'd felt the mate bond snap taut with new life, then go eerily, impossibly silent. Theron Ashenblade, the immortal wolf, the king who'd conquered nations and never bent knee to anyone, stared at the small, blind child before him and felt the foundations of his carefully controlled world begin to crack. "What's your name again?" he asked, his voice rougher than before. "Ilara, Your Majesty." "Ilara Light." A cruel name for a child who lived in permanent darkness. Or perhaps, he thought, looking at her, truly looking at her for the first time, the most fitting name in the world. Because standing there in the gallery of remembrance, surrounded by relics of a history she couldn't see, was a little girl with dark hair that caught the light like midnight silk, with delicate features that would one day be beautiful, with a scent that carried underneath the soap and fear something hauntingly, impossibly familiar. Moonflower and rain, the exact scent of the mate he'd lost. His wolf, silent for 8 years, suddenly stirred. And deep in his chest, in the place where the mate bond had gone dark, he felt the faintest flutter of something he'd thought dead forever. Recognition. 3 months had passed since that encounter in the Gallery of Remembrance, and Ilara's world had shifted in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. The king had not spoken to her again directly, but his presence had become a strange constant in her life. She would feel that distinctive pressure, ancient, overwhelming, and know he was near, watching. The other servants noticed too, their whispers following her through the corridors like shadows. Why does he watch the blind girl? It's unnatural. She's nothing, no one. Maybe he's finally gone mad. 300 years will do that to anyone. Ilara tried to make herself even smaller, even more invisible, but it was impossible to hide from a predator who'd already caught your scent. Then came the summons. I ought to attend the lunar convergence, Maris informed her one morning, her voice tight with disapproval. The king's orders. Every member of the palace household, he said. Even you. The lunar convergence was the most important event in the Lycan Kingdom's calendar. A gathering of all the noble houses, held once every decade when the 3 moons aligned in the night sky. It was during this convergence that the most significant political decisions were made, alliances forged, and power redistributed. It was also, traditionally, when the Alpha King would announce his choice of mate. The palace had been buzzing with speculation for weeks. 3 centuries without a queen had left the succession in question, the noble houses restless. Lady Seraphine of House Nightshade was the favorite, beautiful, cunning, from one of the oldest bloodlines. She'd been positioning herself for years, her ambition as sharp as her smile. Why would the king want me there? Ilara asked, confused. I don't question the king's orders, Maris cut her off. Neither should you. You'll be given appropriate clothing. Try not to embarrass us. The night of the convergence arrived with an electric tension that even Ilara could feel. The palace thrummed with power as hundreds of supernatural beings gathered, not just Lycans, but representatives from allied territories, vampires from the Crimson Courts, their presence marked by the scent of old blood and older magic, witches from the Thornwood Covens carrying the sharp ozone smell of active spellwork, even a delegation of fae whose very existence made the air shimmer with glamour. Ilara had been dressed in a simple gown, grey, unremarkable servant class, and positioned in the far corner of the obsidian hall with the other household staff. She could hear the rustle of fine fabrics, the clink of crystal, the low murmur of conversations conducted in multiple languages and dialects, and underneath it all, the throb of power. So much power concentrated in one space that it made her skin prickle and her head ache. The king enters, someone announced, and the hall fell silent. Ilara felt him before she heard him, that crushing pressure that made her want to drop to her knees. But this time it was different, amplified. This wasn't just the Alpha King. This was the Alpha King in his full ceremonial power, every inch the immortal predator who'd built an empire on the bones of his enemies. Noble houses, his voice rang out, filling every corner of the massive hall. Honored guests, we gather under the aligned moons to reaffirm the bonds that hold our kingdom strong. The ceremony proceeded with formal speeches, oaths of loyalty, the presentation of tributes from various houses. Ilara listened, trying to understand the complex web of politics and power, but much of it was beyond her. Then Lady Seraphine's voice, smooth as poisoned honey. Your Majesty, the noble houses have waited long for you to choose a queen. Surely the time has come to secure your legacy, to produce an heir who will carry your bloodline forward. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. The Lady Seraphine speaks wisely, another voice added, Lord Cassius. House Nightshade has proven its loyalty and strength. A union between the throne and their bloodline would be advantageous. Ilara felt the tension ratchet higher. This was it then, the moment everyone had been waiting for. You presume much, Lord Cassius, the king said, his tone dangerously soft. I choose my own path. I always have. Of course, Your Majesty, Seraphine interjected smoothly, but surely you must consider the kingdom's needs. 3 centuries without an heir leaves us vulnerable, and there is the matter of the mate bond. The silence that followed was absolute. Explain, the king said, each word sharp as a blade. Forgive me, Your Majesty, but the entire kingdom knows you claimed a mate 20 years ago, a human woman who vanished without explanation. Seraphine's voice carried false sympathy. Tragic, truly, but she's been gone for 2 decades. The bond must be considered broken. You are free to choose another. The mate bond, the king said slowly, is not a political arrangement to be dissolved at convenience. But, Your Majesty, Lord Cassius pressed, a human mate, even if she lived, she would be dead by now. Humans are so fragile. Surely the moon goddess would not bind an immortal king to such a fleeting creature. Ilara heard the growl, low, resonant, promising violence. Several people gasped. You dare question the goddess's wisdom? No, Your Majesty. Cassius backtracked quickly. I merely suggest that perhaps the bond was a test, one you've passed, and now you're free to make a choice that serves the kingdom. A choice like Lady Seraphine? The king's voice dripped with disdain. I would be honored to serve as your queen, Seraphine said, and Ilara could hear the triumph already creeping into her voice. To give you the heirs you need to stand beside you as a true partner of power. Is that so? Something shifted in the king's tone, something dangerous. Tell me, Lady Seraphine, what do you know of true partnership, of bonds that transcend politics and power? I know that I am strong, Your Majesty, pure of bloodline, capable of bearing children who would be worthy of your legacy. Worthy, he repeated, an interesting word. Ilara felt him move, felt that pressure shift through the room like a physical force. He was walking, she realized, walking through the crowd, coming closer to where she stood. No, surely not. Tell me, noble houses, the king continued, his voice carrying easily through the hall. What makes someone worthy? Bloodline, power, political advantage. All of these things, Your Majesty, someone answered. I see. And what of loyalty? Compassion? The strength to endure in darkness? Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. The pressure was directly in front of her now. Ilara's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. You, the king said, and she knew with absolute certainty he was speaking to her. Step forward. Your Majesty? Maris's voice sharp with panic. That's just a servant, a blind child. Surely you don't. I gave an order. Ilara's legs moved before her mind could catch up, carrying her forward on instinct and terror. She felt the crowd part around her, felt hundreds of eyes on her small form. What is your name? The king asked, though he knew it perfectly well. Ilara, Your Majesty, she whispered. Ilara, he repeated, and something in the way he said it made her shiver. Tell me, child, if you could see, what would you look for in a person? What would make them worthy of trust? The question was so unexpected that for a moment she couldn't answer. Then, quietly, I don't know about seeing, Your Majesty, but I listen, and I think worthy people are the ones who are kind when they don't have to be, who protect those weaker than themselves, who keep their promises even when it's hard. Silence. Then, a wise answer. He paused. This child was found on the palace steps 8 years ago, during the Blood Moon Festival, the same night my mate vanished. The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. Your Majesty, Seraphine's voice cut through the noise, sharp now, the honey gone. Surely you're not suggesting— I'm not suggesting anything, the king said coldly. I'm stating facts. My mate disappeared. A child appeared. A child who carries a scent I would know anywhere, buried under years of dirt and fear. That's impossible, Lord Cassius sputtered. She's human. Blind, she has no power, no— She has something far more valuable, the king interrupted. She has my attention, and she may very well be the key to finding what was stolen from me. Ilara's mind reeled. His mate? The child who appeared? What was he saying? This is madness. Seraphine's composure finally cracked. You would elevate a blind servant over the noble houses. Over me. I am powerful, beautiful, of pure bloodline. She is nothing. She, the king said, his voice dropping to a lethal purr, is under my protection. And you, Lady Seraphine, have just revealed exactly why you will never stand beside me. The humiliation in Seraphine's sharp intake of breath was audible. Your Majesty, You are dismissed. All of you. This convergence is over. But the ceremonies, someone protested. Over, the king repeated. Leave, now. The crowd began to disperse, whispers exploding into frantic conversations. Ilara stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. She felt him lean closer, felt his breath against her ear as he whispered words meant only for her. Don't be afraid, little one. I'm going to find out who you really are. And if my suspicions are correct... He paused. Everything is about to change. Then he was gone, and Ilara was left standing alone in the center of the obsidian hall, the target of every jealous eye in the kingdom, her small world shattered beyond recognition. The aftermath of the lunar convergence was brutal. Ilara had been moved from the servants' quarters to a small room in the king's private wing, a gesture that sparked outrage and wild speculation throughout the palace. The room was modest by royal standards, but to her it might as well have been a palace itself. Soft carpets instead of cold stone, a bed with actual pillows, and most surprisingly a window that let in warmth she could feel on her skin. But luxury couldn't shield her from the whispers, the barely concealed hostility, the sense that she'd become the center of a storm she didn't understand. "The king's gone mad," she heard servants mutter as she passed. "Obsessed with a blind child. It's unnatural. Lady Seraphine is furious. They say she's already plotting." Ilara tried to make herself invisible again, but it was impossible. The king had marked her as significant, and in a palace built on power dynamics, significance made you either untouchable or a target, often both. 3 days after the convergence, she received her first visitor. "Child," a woman's voice said, cultured and ancient, carrying an accent Ilara couldn't place. "May I enter?" Yes?" Ilara wasn't sure she had the authority to refuse anyone anymore. The door opened, and with it came a scent like old parchment, dried herbs, and something else. Magic, but different from the wild, primal power of the lichens. This was structured, intentional, woven, rather than born. "My name is Morgana Ashwood," the woman said, settling into a chair with a rustle of fabric. "I am the king's advisor on matters of ancient magic and bloodline mysteries. He has asked me to speak with you." "About what?" Ilara asked nervously. "About who you are, child. Or rather, who you might be." A pause. "Tell me, do you remember anything from before you came to the palace? Any memories at all?" Ilara shook her head. "Nothing. The first thing I remember is waking up in the servants' quarters. Maris told me I'd been found on the steps wrapped in a blanket, that's all." "And you've been blind since birth?" "I think so. I don't remember ever seeing anything." She heard Morgana move closer, felt cool fingers touch her forehead. Magic prickled across her skin, not painful but strange, like being examined by invisible hands. "Fascinating," Morgana murmured. "Your blindness isn't natural, child. It's a seal." "A seal?" "A magical binding. Someone placed it on you, likely when you were very young. It's not just blocking your sight, it's suppressing something else, something powerful." Ilara's heart raced. "What do you mean? I don't have any power. I'm human." "Are you?" Morgana's voice held a smile. "The seal is sophisticated, ancient magic, the kind that hasn't been practiced in centuries. Whoever placed it on you knew exactly what they were doing." "But why? Why would anyone—" "That," Morgana interrupted gently, "is what we need to discover. The king believes you may be connected to his missing mate. The timing of your appearance, the scent you carry, the fact that you were left specifically at the palace, none of it is coincidence." "His mate," Ilara whispered. "Everyone says she was human, that she vanished." "Liana," Morgana said softly. Her name was Liana Moonwhisper. She was human, yes, but she carried a rare gift, the ability to calm even the most feral wolf with her voice. The king found her in a village on the border of the Vale, being hunted by Forsaken. He saved her, and the mate bond snapped into place immediately. What happened to her? No one knows. 20 years ago, during the Blood Moon Festival, she simply vanished from the palace. The king searched for years, tore apart kingdoms looking for her, but it was as if she'd been erased from existence. Morgana paused. Until 8 years ago, when he felt something through the mate bond, a surge of life, of new existence, then silence again. You think she had a child? Me. The king believes it's possible. The mate bond would have connected him to any child of his blood, and the timing aligns perfectly." Ilara's mind spun. "But I'm blind, powerless. How could I be—" "The seal, child. If you are who we suspect, someone went to great lengths to hide your true nature. To protect you, perhaps. or to keep you from being found. Can you break it? The seal? Not safely. Not yet. It's tied to your life force. Removing it incorrectly could kill you, but I can begin to weaken it carefully over time. Morgana's voice softened. Would you like that? To discover who you really are? Elara thought of her life in the shadows, always afraid, always less than. Then she thought of the king's words. Everything is about to change. Yes, she whispered. I want to know. Good. Then we begin tomorrow. But child, Morgana's tone turned serious. This will not be easy. There are those in this palace who benefit from you remaining powerless and ignorant. Lady Seraphine, for one. She had her claws in the throne, and you've disrupted her plans. Be careful, be very careful. After Morgana left, Elara sat in her new room, overwhelmed. A seal, ancient magic, the possibility that she might be the king's daughter. It was too much, too impossible. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Elara, a male voice, young, uncertain. May I come in? Who are you? My name is Kieran. I'm nobody important, but I wanted to meet you. Something in his voice made her curious. All right. The door opened and she caught his scent, wolf but young, not yet fully mature. Pine and rain and something warm, like sunlight through leaves. I'm the king's ward, Kieran explained, settling near the window. My parents were killed by Forsaken when I was young. The king took me and trained me. I'm 17 now, preparing to join the Royal Guard. Why did you want to meet me? Because everyone's talking about you and I figured you could use a friend. His voice held a smile. Palace politics are vicious. You'll need allies. I don't understand any of this, Elara admitted. Why the king cares? Why everyone's so angry? You're not just anything, Kieran interrupted gently. The king doesn't do anything without reason. If he's protecting you, there's a purpose. And between you and me, he lowered his voice conspiratorially. I'm glad someone finally knocked Lady Seraphine down a peg. She's been insufferable for years. Despite everything, Elara felt a smile tug at her lips. She seemed very angry, furious. It was beautiful. Kieran laughed. Look, I know you're scared, but you're not alone. The king has his faults. He's cold, ruthless, terrifying, but he's also fiercely protective of those he claims as his, and he's claimed you. I don't know why. Maybe you will. Morgana's brilliant. If anyone can unravel this mystery, it's her. He paused. In the meantime, I can teach you things. How to navigate the palace better, who to trust, who to avoid, how to defend yourself, even without sight. You'd do that? Of course, what are friends for? Friends. Elara had never had a friend before. Thank you, she whispered. Over the following weeks, her world transformed. Morgana worked with her daily, carefully probing the seal, teaching her to sense the magic within herself. Faint, suppressed, but undeniably there. The sessions left her exhausted, but exhilarated. Kieran became her constant companion, teaching her to fight by sound and instinct, to read people by their voices and movements. He was patient, kind, treating her not as a blind child, but as someone capable of strength. And the king remained a distant presence, but she felt him watching, protecting. Once she'd been caught in a corridor by Lord Cassius, who'd grabbed her arm roughly, hissing threats about knowing her place. Before she could even cry out, the temperature had dropped, and Cassius had released her with a yelp of pain. Touch her again. The king's voice had come from somewhere nearby, cold as death. And I'll remove your hand. Slowly. Cassius had fled, but it was the nights that changed everything. Elara had always struggled to sleep, plagued by nightmares she couldn't remember upon waking. But now, in her new room, she would sometimes wake to find she wasn't alone. That distinctive presence, ancient and overwhelming, would be there. The king, sitting in the chair by her window, and he would hum, a melody without words, haunting and beautiful, that seemed to reach into her chest and soothe something she hadn't known was broken. She never spoke during these visits, and neither did he. He would simply sit, humming that strange lullaby until she drifted back to sleep. One night, half asleep, she murmured, "That song, I know it. How do I know it?" The humming stopped. Silence stretched. Then, "Your mother used to sing it," he said quietly, "a long time ago." Before she could respond, before she could ask the 1,000 questions suddenly burning in her mind, sleep claimed her. But in her dreams, for the first time in her life, she heard a woman's voice singing that same lullaby, felt gentle hands stroking her hair, and knew with absolute certainty she was loved. She had been loved, and someone, somewhere, was still searching for her. 6 months had passed since the disastrous lunar convergence, and the palace had become a pressure cooker of tension and intrigue. Ilara was no longer the invisible servant girl. Under Morgana's tutelage, something within her had begun to wake. The seal was weakening, carefully, methodically, and with it came changes she couldn't fully understand. Her other senses had sharpened beyond normal human capacity. She could hear heartbeats from across a room, could smell emotions like fear and anger, could sense the flow of magic around her like currents in water. "You're developing wolf senses," Morgana had explained during one session. "Even with the seal in place, your true nature is beginning to emerge. It's fighting to be free." Kieran had noticed too. During their training sessions, she'd begun to anticipate his movements before he made them, to dodge attacks she shouldn't have been able to sense. "You're getting stronger," he'd said, pride evident in his voice. "Faster, more aware. Whatever you are, Ilara, it's powerful." But power, she was learning, made you dangerous to those who wanted to control you. Lady Seraphine had not forgotten her humiliation. The noblewoman had retreated after the convergence, but her absence had been strategic, not defeated. She'd been gathering allies, spreading poison through whispered conversations and careful manipulation. "The king is compromised," Ilara heard her tell Lord Cassius during a conversation she'd accidentally overheard. "Obsessed with a blind child who may or may not be connected to his dead mate. He's making decisions based on emotion, not logic. The kingdom suffers." "What do you propose?" Cassius had asked. "Patience. Let him expose his weakness further, then we act." The threat hung over everything, but the king seemed unconcerned. If anything, he'd become more protective, more present. The nightly visits continued, those strange vigils where he would sit and hum that haunting lullaby until she slept. She'd grown to crave those moments, the only times she felt truly safe. She'd also grown bold enough to speak during them. "Why do you do this?" she'd asked one night. "Watch over me?" Silence, then, "Because I failed to protect someone once, I won't fail again. Your mate, Lyanna." "Yes." His voice had gone rough. "I was arrogant, believed my power was enough to keep her safe. I was wrong. Morgana says I might be, that I could be, my daughter." He'd said it plainly, without hesitation. "Yes, the timing aligns. The scent you carry, underneath everything else, you smell like moonflowers and rain. Exactly like her. And the bond? When I'm near you, I feel something I haven't felt in 20 years. Connection. But you don't know for certain." "No, not until the seal is fully broken and we can test your blood." But Ilara, he'd leaned closer, and she'd felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. "Whether you're my blood or not, you're under my protection now. That won't change." Those words had settled into her chest like an anchor. Now standing in her room preparing for tonight's event, she felt that anchor pulling taut, because tonight was the autumn equinox gala, another gathering of the noble houses, smaller than the convergence, but no less politically charged. And the king had insisted she attend, not as a servant, as his guest. "This is madness," Maris had hissed when delivering the gown, a beautiful creation in deep midnight blue that shimmered like starlight. "You'll be torn apart. Lady Seraphine will destroy you." But Morgana had smiled when she'd heard. "Good, let them see you. Let them understand that you're not going anywhere." Kieran had been more practical. "Stay close to me during the gala. I'll watch your back, and if anyone tries anything," his voice had turned hard, "they'll regret it." Now, dressed in finery she couldn't see, her hair arranged by servants who'd whispered nervously the entire time, Ilara felt terror and something else. Defiance, maybe. She was tired of being afraid. "Ready?" Kieran's voice came from the doorway. "No," she admitted, "but I don't think that matters." He laughed. "Come on, let's show them what you're made of." The gala was held in the Crystal Ballroom, a space that lived up to its name. Kieran described it as she entered, painting pictures with words. Walls of pure quartz that caught and refracted light, a ceiling that opened to the night sky, floors polished to mirror brightness. Hundreds of guests in their finest, the air thick with perfume and power, and every eye turned to her as she entered on Kieran's arm. The whispers started immediately. "That's her, the blind girl. She's wearing royal colors. The audacity. Look at Seraphine's face. Oh, this is going to be entertaining." Ilara lifted her chin, refusing to show fear. Kieran guided her through the crowd, murmuring descriptions and warnings. Seraphine at 3 o'clock, looking like she wants to commit murder. Lord Cassius near the refreshments already drunk, and the king. He paused. The king just entered, and he's looking right at you. That pressure, ancient and absolute, swept through the room. Conversations died. The crowd parted. Ilara felt him approach, felt every eye tracking his movement. Ilara, the king said, his voice carrying easily through the sudden silence. You look well. Thank you, Your Majesty, she managed. Walk with me. It wasn't a request. Kieran released her arm, and she felt the king's hand, large, warm, surprisingly gentle, take its place. He guided her through the crowd, and she could feel the shock rippling around them. The Alpha King, who touched no one, who'd remained isolated for centuries, was publicly escorting a blind child through a royal gala. You're making a statement, she whispered. Yes, he agreed. I am. Let them see. Let them understand that you are mine to protect. Lady Seraphine looks ready to explode. Good. She's been a thorn in my side for decades. Time someone reminded her that I bow to no one's expectations. They reached the center of the ballroom, and the king stopped. There will be dancing soon. Traditional pack dances, complex, requiring perfect synchronization. I can't dance, Ilara said, panic rising. I can't see the steps. You don't need to see, he interrupted. You need to feel. Trust your instincts. Trust me. The music began, drums and strings, primal and elegant at once. Around them couples began to move in intricate patterns. Your Majesty, Lady Seraphine's voice cut through the music, sharp as glass. Surely you're not planning to dance with the child. She'll embarrass herself. Embarrass you. The king turned, and Ilara felt the temperature drop. Lady Seraphine, I don't recall asking for your opinion. I merely seek to protect your dignity, Your Majesty. As someone who cares for your well-being, you care for power, he said coldly. Not for me. There's a difference. Your Majesty, please be reasonable. Look at her, blind, weak, human. She doesn't belong here. She doesn't belong at your side. And you do. His voice could have cut stone. You who scheme and manipulate, who see people as pieces on a board, who would use me to elevate yourself. Seraphine's composure cracked. I would give you everything. Heirs, power, a queen worthy of your throne. What can she give you? Nothing. She's nothing. The king's growl reverberated through the ballroom. Several people stepped back instinctively. She, he said, each word deliberate, has given me something you never could. Hope. The possibility that what I lost might not be gone forever. And even if I'm wrong, even if she's not my blood, she has more courage in her small frame than you've shown in your entire existence. He turned back to Ilara, his voice softening. Dance with me, little one. Show them what you're capable of. I don't know how, she whispered. Yes, you do. Close your eyes. Well, you know what I mean. Feel the music. Feel my movements. Let your instincts guide you. The music swelled. He placed her hand on his shoulder, his hand at her waist, and began to move. At first, she stumbled, uncertain. But then something clicked. She could feel the rhythm in her bones, could sense his movements before he made them, could hear the pattern in the music. Her body began to respond, moving in sync with his, following steps she'd never learned but somehow knew. Around them the crowd gasped. She was dancing, truly dancing, moving through the complex patterns with grace that shouldn't have been possible for someone who couldn't see. How? She breathed. Your wolf, the king murmured. It's waking up. Wolves dance by instinct, by connection to their pack. You're feeling what I feel, moving as I move. The seal is breaking, Ilara. Your true nature is emerging. The dance built to a crescendo, and she felt something surge within her, power, wild and ancient, pushing against the seal. For just a moment, the world exploded into sensation. She could feel everything, every heartbeat in the room, every breath, every thread of magic. And she could see, not with her eyes, but with something else. A wolf's sight, seeing heat and movement and the very essence of things. She saw the king, truly saw him for the first time. Silver and gold eyes blazing with emotion, features sharp and beautiful and terrible. She saw Kieran grinning with pride, saw Seraphine, face twisted with rage and jealousy, saw Morgana at the edge of the crowd, nodding with satisfaction. Then the seal snapped back into place, and the vision vanished. But the memory remained. The music ended. The king steadied her as she swayed, overwhelmed. I saw, she whispered. I saw you. His hand tightened on hers. The seal is almost broken. Soon, little one, soon you'll see everything. Applause erupted through the ballroom, genuine, awed. Even those who'd been hostile seemed stunned by what they'd witnessed, all except Seraphine, who stood frozen, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. The king addressed the crowd, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Let this be clear to everyone present. Ilara is under my protection. She is Pac, and anyone who threatens her threatens me." A declaration of war, wrapped in a promise of protection. As the gala continued, Ilara remained at the king's side, no longer invisible, no longer nothing. She was becoming something else entirely, and the palace would never be the same. The morning after the gala, Ilara woke to chaos. "Assassination attempt." Kieran burst into her room, breathless. "On you, last night after you'd gone to bed. Poisoned wine left in your chamber. If the king hadn't had guards posted..." Ilara's blood ran cold. "Who?" "They're investigating, but everyone knows who's behind it." His voice turned hard. "Seraphine's getting desperate." The king had responded with swift, brutal efficiency. By midday, 3 servants had been arrested, all with connections to House Nightshade. Lady Seraphine herself had been summoned to the throne room for questioning, emerging pale and shaken, but not yet formally accused. "He can't prove I ordered it," she'd hissed to Lord Cassius in a conversation Ilara had overheard. "And without proof, he can't move against a noble house directly. But this isn't over. That blind brat has to go." The palace had become a battlefield, and Ilara was the prize everyone fought over. "We need to accelerate the process," Morgana announced during their session that afternoon. "The seal is weakening naturally, but it's not fast enough. You're in danger, child. Real danger. If we can break it completely, reveal your true nature, you'll have power of your own, protection beyond what the king can provide." "Will it hurt?" Ilara asked. "Yes," Morgana said honestly. "Breaking a seal this old, this powerful, it will be agony, but it will also set you free. Then do it." The ritual took place that night in Morgana's tower, a space saturated with ancient magic. The king insisted on being present, along with Kieran and Commander Darius, the king's most trusted warrior, a grizzled veteran who'd served for over a century. "This is dangerous," Darius had warned. "If the seal was placed by someone powerful, breaking it could trigger defenses, curses, even death." "I'm aware," the king said coldly. "Proceed anyway." Morgana had Ilara lie in the center of a circle inscribed with runes that glowed with silver light. "This will hurt," she repeated, "but you must not resist. Let the magic flow through you. Let it break what was bound." The ritual began with words in a language Ilara didn't recognize. Old primal, the tongue of the first magic users. Power gathered in the air, thick and oppressive. Then, Morgana's hands touched Ilara's forehead, and the world exploded into pain. It felt like being torn apart from the inside. The seal, woven into her very essence, fought against its breaking. She screamed, her body convulsing, and distantly heard the king snarl, heard Kieran cry out. "Don't stop," Morgana commanded. "We're almost through." Images flooded Ilara's mind, memories that weren't hers, or were they? A woman with dark hair and kind eyes, singing a lullaby. The same woman, pregnant, running through a forest, terror on her face. A hooded figure chanting, placing hands on a newborn's face. "Hide her," the woman begged. "Please hide her from them. They'll kill her if they find her." "Who?" Ilara tried to ask, but the pain swallowed the words. The seal shattered. Power erupted from Ilara like a shockwave, sending everyone except Morgana stumbling backward. The runes blazed white-hot, then went dark, and Ilara opened her eyes, actually opened them, and saw. The world rushed in, colors, shapes, light and shadow. It was overwhelming, beautiful, terrifying. She saw Morgana's face, lined with age and wisdom, eyes glowing with satisfaction, saw Kieran, young and strong, staring at her with wonder, saw Commander Darius, scarred and battle-hardened, hand on his sword, and saw the king, Theron Ashenblade, the immortal wolf, the Alpha King. He was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. Sharp features, silver and gold eyes that burned with ancient power, dark hair that fell to his shoulders. But it was the expression on his face that made her breath catch. Hope, raw, desperate hope. "Your eyes," he whispered. "Ilara, your eyes." "What about them?" Her voice came out hoarse from screaming. "One silver," Kieran breathed. "One gold. Just like mine," the king finished. "The mark of the ancient bloodline. The mark that hasn't appeared in anyone outside my direct line in 3 centuries. Silence fell like a hammer. The blood test, Morgana said quietly. We need to be certain. The test was simple. A drop of Ilara's blood, a drop of the king's, mixed in a crystal vial with a reagent that would glow if they shared lineage. The brighter the glow, the closer the relation. Morgana pricked Ilara's finger, then the king's. The blood drops fell into the vial. The reaction was immediate and blinding. The vial blazed with light so bright they had to shield their eyes, pulsing with power that made the air vibrate. Parent and child, Morgana said, her voice shaking. No doubt, no question. She's yours, Your Majesty, your daughter. The king made a sound, something between a laugh and a sob. Then he was moving, crossing the space between them, dropping to his knees in front of her so they were eye level. Ilara, he said, and his voice broke on her name. My daughter, my child, I searched for you. For 8 years I searched, and you were here, right here, suffering, alone, and I didn't know. Tears streamed down his face. The immortal wolf, the terror of nations, weeping openly. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry I didn't find you sooner, that I didn't protect you, that you had to endure so much. Ilara, overwhelmed, could only stare at this powerful being crying before her. Then, instinctively, she reached out and touched his face. You found me now, he said softly. That's what matters. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she might disappear, and she felt something slot into place, a connection, deep and unbreakable. The mate bond he'd spoken of, she could feel it now, a golden thread connecting her to him, pulsing with love and protection. Your mother, he said after a long moment, pulling back to look at her. The memories you saw during the ritual, that was Liana. Your mother. She's alive, Ilara. She has to be. The bond never broke completely. She's out there somewhere. Then we find her, Ilara said, and was surprised by the strength in her own voice. We find her and bring her home. The king smiled, a real smile, the first she'd ever seen from him. Yes, we will. But first, there were more immediate concerns. The noble houses will lose their minds, Darius said bluntly. An heir, a legitimate heir to the throne. This changes everything. Let them, the king said, standing, his hand still holding Ilara's. I have my daughter back. I have hope of finding my mate. The political games of ambitious nobles mean nothing compared to that. Seraphine will escalate, Kieran warned. She tried to kill Ilara when she was just a blind servant under your protection. Now that she's your heir, she'll be even more desperate. Then we end this, the king said, his voice turning cold. Tonight. I've tolerated Seraphine's schemes long enough. She attempted to murder my child. That is a crime punishable by death, Your Majesty, Morgana interjected carefully. Moving against a noble house requires evidence. Proof that will satisfy the council. Then we get proof, he turned to Darius. The servants you arrested. Interrogate them. Find the connection to Seraphine. I want something concrete by dawn. And if they don't talk? The king's smile was terrifying. They'll talk. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Ilara, exhausted from the ritual, was taken back to her room, but not the small chamber she'd occupied before. Now she was moved to the royal wing proper, the rooms befitting a princess. This is too much, she'd protested, staring at the opulent space. She could actually see it now, the rich fabrics, the artwork, the luxury. It's not enough, the king had replied. You're my daughter, my heir. You deserve everything I can give you. Kieran had stayed with her, describing things she was still learning to process visually, making her laugh with his commentary. That painting, hideous. Some ancestor of the king's who apparently had no chin. And that vase? I broke one just like it when I was 12. The king made me work in the kitchens for a month. He's not as scary as everyone thinks, Ilara said. Oh, he's absolutely terrifying, Kieran corrected. But he's also capable of love. He just doesn't show it often. You've cracked that armor, Ilara. You've given him something to fight for beyond duty. Near dawn, Darius returned with news. One of the servants broke, he reported. Gave us everything. Letters from Seraphine, payment records, explicit orders to poison the girl. We have her. The king's expression was glacial. Summon the council. At sunrise we convene a formal tribunal. Lady Seraphine will answer for her crimes. She'll fight, Morgana warned. She has allies. Let her. The king looked at Ilara, and his eyes blazed with protective fury. She threatened my child. There is no force in this world or any other that will save her from the consequences. As the sun rose over the Blood Moon Palace, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Ilara stood at her window, seeing a sunrise for the first time in her life, and felt the weight of her new reality settling over her. She was a princess, an heir, the daughter of the most powerful being in the supernatural world. And somewhere out there, her mother was waiting to be found. But first, they had a traitor to deal with, and Ilara, no longer blind, no longer powerless, intended to watch justice be served. 6 months later, the Blood Moon Palace had transformed, and so had Ilara. She stood in the training courtyard, her newly awakened senses tracking Kieran's movements as they sparred. Her wolf, still young, still learning, gave her speed and strength she'd never imagined possessing. She dodged his strike, countered with her own, and heard him laugh as he blocked. "You're getting too good at this," he said, breathing hard. "Soon you won't need me anymore." "I'll always need you," Ilara replied, and meant it. Kieran had become more than a friend. He was her brother in all but blood, her constant companion, her anchor in this new world. "Break!" Commander Darius called from the sidelines. "Princess, your form is improving, but you're still telegraphing your left strikes. Again tomorrow, dawn." Princess. She was still getting used to that title. The tribunal had been swift and brutal. Lady Seraphine, confronted with irrefutable evidence of her assassination attempt, had tried to bargain, to threaten, to manipulate. But the king had been immovable. "You attempted to murder my child," he'd said, his voice echoing through the council chamber. "My heir. There is only one punishment for such a crime." Seraphine had been stripped of her titles, her lands, her power. House Nightshade had been dissolved, its assets distributed among loyal houses, and Seraphine herself had been exiled beyond the Veil, into the territories of the Forsaken. A death sentence, essentially. No one survived long in those wild places. Ilara had watched it all, feeling not triumph but a strange sadness. Seraphine had destroyed herself through ambition and jealousy, unable to see that power gained through cruelty was no power at all. Lord Cassius and the other conspirators had faced similar fates. The message had been clear: threaten the king's daughter and face annihilation. The palace had settled into a new order after that. Ilara was no longer a curiosity or a target. She was the crown princess, heir to the throne, and treated with the respect and deference that position commanded. But more importantly, she'd found her place. Under Morgana's continued tutelage, she'd learned to control her emerging powers. She was a hybrid, part human from her mother, part ancient wolf from her father. The combination gave her unique abilities. She could sense emotions like her mother had, could calm even the most aggressive wolves with her voice. But she also had her father's strength, his connection to the primal magic that fueled their kind. "You're going to be formidable," Morgana had told her. "Perhaps even more powerful than your father, given time. The combination of bloodlines has created something new." Ilara had thrown herself into learning, not just magic and combat, but politics, history, diplomacy. If she was to be a leader, she would be a good one. She would protect those who couldn't protect themselves, would use her power to help rather than harm. She'd also taken on a project close to her heart, reforming the treatment of servants in the palace. No more cruelty, no more abuse. She'd established rules, protections, consequences for those who violated them. "You're changing things," Kieran had observed, "making the palace better." "I remember what it was like to be powerless," she'd replied. "I won't let others suffer that way if I can prevent it." Now, cleaned up from training, she made her way to her father's study. They met every afternoon, these sessions a blend of governance lessons and simply spending time together, rebuilding what had been stolen from them. "Come in," his voice called before she could knock. She entered to find him at his desk, surrounded by maps and reports. But he looked up immediately, his mismatched eyes so like her own, softening. "How was training? Darius says I'm improving. Kieran says I'm becoming insufferable." She grinned. "I think both are true." He laughed, and the sound still surprised her. The cold, terrifying king everyone feared had become, with her, simply a father. Protective, proud, occasionally overprotective. "I have news," he said, his expression turning serious. "About your mother." Ilara's heart leaped. They'd been searching for months, following every lead, chasing every whisper. "What did you find?" "A report from our scouts near the Northern Vale. A woman matching Liana's description was seen in a village there, living under a false name. She's been hiding, Ilara, deliberately staying off our radar." "Why? Why wouldn't she come home? That's what we need to find out. He stood, moving around the desk to face her. I'm going to retrieve her, personally, and I want you to come with me. Really? She's your mother. You deserve to be there when we find her, and... His voice roughened. I think she needs to see you, to know that you're safe, that you're alive. It might be the only thing that convinces her to trust me again. When do we leave? Tomorrow at dawn. It's a 3-day journey. Darius and Kieran will accompany us, along with a small guard unit. He paused. Are you ready for this? To meet her. Ilara thought about the woman from her fragmented memories. The voice singing lullabies, the gentle hands, the love that had transcended even magical seals and separation. Yes, she said. I'm ready. The journey north was Ilara's first real venture beyond the palace grounds. She saw the kingdom her father ruled, vast forests where ancient magic still thrummed, villages where wolves and humans lived in careful coexistence, the shimmering barrier of the veil that separated their world from the purely supernatural realms. It's beautiful, she breathed, taking it all in with eyes that still marveled at the gift of sight. It's yours, her father replied. Someday, all of this will be your responsibility, your kingdom to protect. That's terrifying. Yes, but you won't be alone. You'll have advisors, allies, people who believe in you. He glanced at her. And you'll have me for as long as I live. You're immortal, she pointed out. Nothing is truly immortal, little one. But yes, I'll be here for a very long time, long enough to see you become the queen I know you'll be. They reached the village on the 3rd day, a small settlement on the edge of the Vale, where the barrier between worlds was thin enough to see through if you knew how to look. The scouts had tracked Lyanna to a cottage on the outskirts, where she lived as a healer, helping the villagers with herbs and minor magic. She's been here for 8 years, the lead scout reported. Keeps to herself mostly. The villagers respect her but don't ask questions. 8 years, the king repeated, his jaw tight. She's been here since she left Ilara at the palace, Morgana finished quietly. She'd insisted on coming, sensing that magic might be needed. She was protecting her, Your Majesty, hiding her from whoever placed that seal. They approached the cottage as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The king knocked, and Ilara's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The door opened. The woman who stood there was exactly as Ilara remembered from her fragmented visions, dark hair streaked with premature silver, kind eyes that had seen too much sorrow, delicate features marked by years of worry. She wore simple clothing, her hands stained with herb work. Those eyes widened as she saw the king. Theron, she whispered, and the name held 20 years of longing and pain. Lyanna. His voice broke on it. I found you. Finally, I found you. You shouldn't be here. It's not safe. Then her gaze shifted, landing on Ilara, and she froze. No, it can't be. You're supposed to be hidden. The seal is broken, Ilara said softly. Hello, Mother. Lyanna's legs gave out. The king caught her, holding her as she stared at Ilara, with tears streaming down her face. My baby, she sobbed. My little girl, you're alive, you're safe, She reached out with shaking hands, touching Ilara's face as if to confirm she was real. Your eyes. Oh gods, your eyes. The seal breaking revealed your true nature. I'm his daughter, Ilara said. Yours and his. We know everything. How? The magic I used should have hidden you completely, made you invisible to anyone searching. You left her at the palace, the king said, his voice rough with emotion. On the steps? During the Blood Moon Festival? Why, Lyanna, why didn't you come to me? Because they were hunting us, Lyanna said, pulling back to look at him. The Shadow Court. They knew about the baby, knew she would be powerful, a hybrid of human and ancient wolf bloodlines. They wanted her, Theron, wanted to use her, to corrupt her, to turn her into a weapon. The Shadow Court, a faction of rogue supernaturals who'd been trying to overthrow the established order for centuries. I ran, Lyanna continued. Took her and ran, but they found us. I had no choice. I brought her to the one place they couldn't easily reach, your palace, and I found a witch who could seal her powers, make her seem human and unremarkable. Then I left her there where you would eventually find her, where she'd be safe. And you? The king demanded. Why didn't you stay? Why hide for 20 years? Because they were still hunting me. If I'd stayed, they would have found me, tortured me for information about her. I had to disappear completely, had to make them think I'd died. It was the only way to keep her safe. Tears continued to fall. I've been watching from afar, using magic to check on her. Seeing her suffer, seeing her alone and afraid and not being able to help, it nearly destroyed me. But I couldn't risk it, couldn't risk them finding her. The Shadow Court is broken, the king said. I destroyed their leadership 5 years ago. You've been hiding from ghosts, my love. 5 years? Lyanna's voice cracked. I could have come back 5 years ago? You didn't know. How could you? He pulled her close again. But you're safe now, both of you. And we're together. Finally, we're together. The three of them stood there, father, mother, daughter, reunited after 20 years of separation, pain and longing. The mate bond, dormant for so long, blazed back to life between Theron and Lyanna, golden and unbreakable, and Elara, standing between her parents, felt complete for the first time in her life. Come home, the king said to Lyanna. Both of you come home. Let me give you the life you should have had, the family we were meant to be. Lyanna looked at Elara, really looked at her, seeing not the blind, frightened child she'd left behind, but the strong, confident young woman she'd become. You're extraordinary, she whispered. Everything I hoped you'd be. I had help, Elara replied, smiling. A father who never stopped searching, friends who became family, teachers who believed in me, and a mother who loved me enough to sacrifice everything to keep me safe. They returned to the palace together, a family reunited. The kingdom celebrated for days. Their king had found his mate, their princess had found her mother, and hope had been restored. Elara stood on her balcony months later, watching the 3 moons align in the sky, another convergence approaching. But this time she wouldn't be a frightened servant girl. She would stand beside her father as crown princess, with her mother at her side, and face whatever came with strength and grace. She'd been found in darkness, had lived in blindness, had suffered in silence, but she'd emerged into light, had gained sight beyond the physical, had found her voice and her power. And she would use both to build a kingdom worth inheriting, one where the powerless were protected, where love triumphed over ambition, where family meant more than politics. The blind girl had become a princess, the lost child had found her way home, and the lullaby that had connected them all, father, mother, daughter, would echo through the palace halls for generations to come, a reminder that some bonds can never truly be broken. They only wait, patient and inevitable, to be made whole again. Thank you for joining us on Elara's journey from darkness to light, from lost to found, from powerless to powerful. If you enjoyed this story of family, magic, and the unbreakable bonds of love, please subscribe to our channel for more paranormal romance tales. Leave a comment telling us where you're listening from. We love hearing from our global audience. And share this story with someone who believes in the power of hope and the magic of second chances. Until next time, may you always find your way home.